Jessica isn't even our real daughter anyway." Those were the words my mother, Patricia Collins, spoke into the microphone at my wedding reception, in front of 150 guests, while I stood there in my white dress, frozen in disbelief. She had waited 28 years to drop this bomb, choosing the happiest day of my life to detonate it. But what she didn't know was that my real parents had been searching for me for decades. And they were about to walk through those reception hall doors with a truth that would shatter everything Patricia thought she knew about control and revenge. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. October 14th, 2023, at the Riverside Manor in Charleston. My fiancé Marcus Thompson and I had planned every detail for 18 months. During the father-daughter dance with my dad, Robert Collins, Patricia suddenly grabbed the DJ's microphone. "Excuse me, everyone," she announced with a sickeningly sweet smile. "I have something important to share about the bride." The music stopped. Marcus looked confused. My heart started racing as Patricia's eyes locked onto mine with pure malice. Jessica has always been special to us, even though she's adopted. We took her in when her real parents abandoned her as a baby. The room went dead silent. 28 years, and she had never once mentioned this. She chose my wedding day to destroy me. We've been so generous, giving her everything despite knowing she wasn't really ours. And this is how she repays us, by barely inviting any of our friends to her big day. That's when I realized this wasn't just cruelty. This was calculated revenge. Growing up as Jessica Collins in suburban Atlanta, I always felt like an outsider. Patricia and Robert had my older brother Dylan, who shared their brown eyes and stubborn chin. Then there was me, blonde hair, green, eyes completely different. When I asked about it, Patricia would snap, "You got recessive genes. Stop asking stupid questions." The inequality was constant. Dylan got a brand new Honda for his 16th birthday. I got Patricia's broken Toyota with a note saying, "Be grateful." When Dylan failed his SATs twice, they hired a 200 per hour tutor. When I scored in the 95th percentile, Patricia said, "Don't get cocky. You'll still need to work twice as hard." Dylan could curse at dinner and get a chuckle. If I forgot to say please, I was lectured about respect. When Dylan crashed his car, Patricia comforted him and bought another one. When I got a small dent, she screamed at me for an hour and made me pay. For repairs with my part-time job money, college revealed the full scope. Dylan changed majors 4 times while Patricia cheerfully wrote tuition checks. I received a partial scholarship to Georgia State and worked 3 jobs to cover the rest. Patricia would brag about Dylan's pre-med track while telling people I was still figuring things out, even though I graduated summa cum laude. The cruelest part was how Patricia used my desperate need for approval against me. I planned Mother's Day brunches, remembered birthdays, called home weekly. Dylan forgot holidays and showed up when he needed money. Yet somehow, I was always disappointed. Standing in that reception hall, I felt something inside me shatter. 28. Years of feeling like an outsider suddenly made horrifying sense. The emotional distance, the different treatment, the way Patricia sometimes looked at me like I was a stranger she was forced to tolerate. Marcus rushed to my side, shouting at Patricia, but she just smiled and handed back the microphone as if she'd announced the dessert menu. I ran to the bridal suite and locked myself in. Marcus pounded on the door, but I couldn't face anyone. I sat on the floor in my wedding dress, mascara streaming, trying to process the magnitude of Patricia's betrayal. She hadn't just revealed a family secret. She had stolen my wedding day, my identity, and my dignity in front of everyone I cared about. The timing wasn't accidental. She could have told me privately years ago, but she waited until I was surrounded by friends and colleagues to detonate this bomb. Through the door, I could hear the reception continuing in awkward spurts. I imagined my guests whispering, comparing, notes about all the times I'd seemed insecure about my place in my family. Everyone was talking about me, and I couldn't bear to face any of them. But as I sat there surrounded by tulle and broken dreams, something shifted. The shock crystallized into clarity. For the first time, Patricia's behavior made complete sense. The emotional withholding, the constant criticism, it wasn't because I was defective. She had been harboring this secret, using it as a weapon, raising me with one hand while holding a grenade in the other. After 20 minutes, Marcus convinced me to open the door. He sat beside me and said, "I don't care if you were adopted or found in a basket. You're my wife now, and we're going to figure this out together." His certainty became my anchor. We canceled our Hawaii honeymoon and spent our first week as newlyweds, researching adoption records and hiring a private investigator. We discovered that sealed adoptions could sometimes be reopened, and that birth parents often registered with reunion databases. What we found changed everything. According to the records, I wasn't abandoned as Patricia claimed. My birth parents, David and Catherine Hartwell from Savannah, had been teenagers who made an adoption plan because they weren't financially ready. They had requested updates and photos, which Patricia agreed to facilitate, then completely cut off contact once the paperwork was finalized. More shocking, David and Catherine had been married for 26 years and searching for me for over a decade. They had registered with every reunion database, hired investigators, and never stopped hoping. They had other children now and had always intended for me to be part of their extended family. The investigator found them within 2 weeks. David was now a successful contractor, Catherine a high school counselor, and they had 3 other children, twins Michael and Michelle, 24, and younger son Kevin, 21. They lived in Savannah's historic district and had kept a photo of me as a baby on their mantelpiece for 28 years. When Marcus and I drove to meet them, I was terrified. But the moment Catherine opened the door and saw my face, she burst into tears and whispered, "You have your grandmother's eyes. We never forgot those eyes." For the first time in my life, I understood what it felt like to be genuinely wanted by parents who saw me as a gift, not a burden. 3 weeks after meeting my birth parents, we hosted a family dinner at our apartment. I invited Patricia, Robert, and Dylan, telling them only that I had some people I wanted them to meet. Patricia assumed it was Marcus's relatives and arrived overdressed with fake pleasantries. The doorbell rang at 6 p.m. I opened it to reveal David and Catherine, impeccably dressed and carrying flowers. Patricia looked up from her wine glass, saw Catherine's face, and went completely pale. "Jessica, who are these people?" David stepped forward and extended his hand. "I'm David Hartwell, and this is my wife Catherine. We're Jessica's birth parents." The silence was deafening. Robert dropped his fork. Dylan stared open-mouthed. But Patricia's reaction was pure panic before she composed herself into defensive anger. "I don't know what Jessica has told you, but we fulfilled our legal obligations. Completely." Catherine's voice was steady. "Actually, you didn't. You agreed to facilitate ongoing contact and then disappeared." David pulled out a folder of documents, letters they had written every birthday and Christmas, photos of my siblings growing up, copies of the original adoption agreement showing Patricia had committed to annual updates and visits when I turned 18. "You promised we could be part of her life," Catherine said. "We never wanted to disappear." Patricia's mask slipped. "She was our daughter from the moment you signed those papers. You have no right to waltz in here and confuse her." Dylan surprised everyone. "Mom, you announced at her wedding that she was adopted. How is this confusing her more than that?" The most damning evidence came from adoption agency records. Patricia had specifically requested a closed adoption with no future contact, after initially agreeing to an open arrangement. She had lied to the agency, claiming my birth parents were unstable and potentially dangerous. She had actively worked to erase them from my life, not to protect me, but to maintain complete control. 6 months later, I stood in David and Catherine's Savannah garden, celebrating my 29th birthday, the first with my birth parents. Catherine had recreated my first birthday cake, and we were taking family photos that should have been taken decades ago. Marcus fit seamlessly into this new dynamic, joking with my brothers and helping Kevin with college applications. The contrast was stark. Where Patricia had always made me feel like I was taking up too much space, David and Catherine made me feel like I had always belonged. They asked about my work with genuine interest, celebrated my achievements without qualification, and never made me feel like I owed them gratitude for basic parental love. Patricia tried to reconcile, sending cards and voicemails, but her apologies always came with conditions. "I'm sorry if you feel I hurt you, but everything I did was out of love." She couldn't simply say, "I was wrong." Robert eventually divorced her. Dylan and I rebuilt our relationship on honest ground, and he admitted he'd always felt guilty about the preferential treatment. The most healing part wasn't just gaining a new family, it was understanding that I hadn't been defective or unworthy. I had been a wanted child, raised by someone threatened by the very love that created me. Patricia's cruelty hadn't been about my failures. It had been about her own insecurity and need for control. Now, when I look at my wedding photos, I don't see the moment my life fell apart. I see the moment my real life began. Patricia thought she was destroying me with her revelation, but she actually freed me. She gave me permission to stop trying to earn love from someone incapable of giving it. David and Catherine had a saying, "Family isn't about whose blood you carry, it's about whose heart carries you." Patricia thought family meant ownership and control. My real parents knew it means choice and unconditional acceptance. After 28 years of confusion, I finally know the difference. And I finally know where I belong. But the story doesn't end there. 2 months after that confrontational dinner, Catherine called me with news that would expose the full depth of Patricia's deception. "Jessica, honey, we've been going through some old boxes and we found something you need to see." When Marcus and I arrived at their Savannah home, David was sitting at the kitchen table with a manila envelope, his expression grim. "These were hidden in your grandmother's attic," Catherine explained. "We almost threw them away until we realized what they were." Inside were dozens of letters, my letters, crayon drawings I'd made in elementary school with notes saying, "For my real mommy and daddy." School photos Patricia had clearly sent in the early years, then abruptly stopped. Report cards showing my straight A's. And most heartbreaking of all, a letter I'd written when I was 12 years old that began, "Dear birth parents, I hope you're okay. I think about you every day." "We never received any of these," David said, his voice thick with emotion. "Not one letter, not one photo after you turned 5. We thought you'd forgotten about us or that you were angry we'd given you up." Catherine pulled out a stack of her own letters, responses to mine that had been returned to sender, marked addressee unknown. Patricia had been intercepting our correspondence both ways, but the most shocking discovery was a legal document dated from when I was 16. It was a petition Patricia had filed to have my original birth certificate permanently sealed, claiming that David and Catherine had been harassing the family. She had forged my signature on the document, making it appear that I, as a minor, had requested no future contact with my biological parents. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. "She didn't just lie to us," I whispered, staring at my forged teenage signature. "She committed fraud, multiple times." The weight of it hit me. Patricia hadn't just kept a secret or made a cruel announcement. She had systematically destroyed relationships, intercepted mail, forged legal documents, and stolen decades of potential connection between me and my birth family. Marcus was furious. "This isn't just emotional abuse anymore, Jessica. This is criminal behavior. Identity theft, mail fraud, forging legal documents. She could go to prison for this." But David and Catherine surprised me with their response. "We don't want revenge," Catherine said softly. "We want healing. We've found our daughter. That's enough." Looking at those intercepted letters, I realized that 12-year-old Jessica had been wiser than I'd given her credit for. She had known something was missing. She had reached out, trying to bridge a gap she didn't even understand. And Patricia had stolen that too, my own intuitive need to connect with my origins. The letter discovery led to another revelation that would completely rewrite my understanding of family. Catherine mentioned that my birth grandmother, Helen Hartwell, had passed away just 6 months before we reunited. "She never stopped asking about you," Catherine said tearfully. "Every Sunday dinner, she'd wonder out loud if you were happy, if you were loved, if you knew how much we all missed you." What I learned next took my breath away. Helen had been setting aside money for me since the day I was born, not just a small savings account, but substantial investments and inheritance funds that had grown to over $200,000 by the time of her death. She had left everything to me in her will, with detailed instructions that it should go toward my education, my wedding, or starting a family. She made us promise that if we ever found you, we'd tell you that she loved you every single day, David said, pulling out Helen's handwritten will. She used to say that love doesn't diminish with distance or time, and that somewhere out there, her granddaughter was being loved by someone who couldn't see her worth. The inheritance wasn't just money. It was validation. Somewhere, a grandmother I'd never met had been thinking about me, planning for my future, and believing in my worth even when I couldn't believe in it myself. Patricia had robbed me of knowing Helen while she was alive, but she couldn't steal the love Helen had been storing up for me all those years. But there was more. Michael and Michelle, my biological twins, had kept a scrapbook about me. They'd collected newspaper clippings from my high school achievements that they'd found online, printed my college graduation announcement from Georgia State's website, and even found photos from social media that Patricia had somehow missed. They had been building a picture of their sister's life from fragments, hoping someday to fill in the gaps. "We wanted to know you even if we couldn't meet you," Michelle explained when she showed me the scrapbook. "Mom and Dad always told us we had a sister out there who was probably amazing, and we wanted to be ready to love you when you came home." Kevin, the youngest, had even written me letters he'd never sent, updating me on family news and telling me about school, girlfriends, and dreams for the future. The stark contrast was overwhelming. While Patricia had spent 28 years making me feel like an unwanted burden, the Hartwell family had spent 28 years creating space for me in their hearts and their lives. They had prepared for my return, planned for my future, and loved me actively even in my absence. That night, looking through the scrapbook and Helen's letters, I realized that I hadn't just gained a family, I had always had one. They had been loving me, missing me, and preparing for me while Patricia had been systematically erasing every trace of that love. The cruelty wasn't just in the wedding announcement, it was in the decades of stolen connection that preceded. Word travels fast in Charleston's tight-knit wedding vendor community, and by the following week, the story of my wedding day disaster had reached every florist, photographer, and venue coordinator in the city. But instead of gossip and judgment, something unexpected happened, an outpouring of support that restored my faith in human decency. Sarah Martinez, my maid of honor who worked as an event planner, called me 3 days after the wedding with an idea. "Jessica, what if we could redo your reception? Just the good parts this time." She had quietly reached out to our vendors, explained the situation, and every single one of them, the photographer, DJ, florist, and even the Riverside Manor, offered to donate their services for a second celebration. "Nobody should have their wedding memories poisoned like that," said Elena Rodriguez, our photographer. "Let me take the photos that should have been taken the first time, the ones where you're smiling because you're happy, not because you're trying to hold it together." The DJ, Marcus Johnson, offered to recreate our first dance in a room full of people who actually love you both. The response from our guests was equally overwhelming. My college friends organized a group chat to plan the do-over reception, and Marcus's family embraced the Hartwells immediately, treating them like long-lost relatives rather than strangers with a complicated past. His mother, Linda Thompson, even apologized for Patricia's behavior, as if she were somehow responsible for another mother's cruelty. But the most meaningful response came from my workplace. My supervisor, Dr. Rachel Kim, had been at the wedding and witnessed the entire spectacle. On Monday morning, she pulled me aside and said something I'll never forget. "Jessica, I've worked with you for 4 years. I've seen your integrity, your work ethic, and your character. Whatever dysfunction exists in your family of origin doesn't reflect on who you are as a person." She had spoken to HR about offering me additional family leave to deal with the emotional fallout, and my colleagues had quietly organized a care package, gift cards for meals, a spa day, and handwritten notes of support. "You're not defined by someone else's inability to love you properly," wrote Jake Morrison from accounting. "You're defined by how you've chosen to build your own life despite that." The community rallying around us felt like a protective barrier against Patricia's toxicity. These people, friends, colleagues, vendors who barely knew us, understood something fundamental that Patricia had never grasped, that love multiplies when it's shared generously, and that cruelty diminishes the person who wields it more than its intended target. Even strangers began reaching out. Elena had posted a few of our original wedding photos on her business Instagram, with a caption about the power of chosen family, and the comments section filled with similar stories. Adoptees who had faced family rejection, people whose parents had sabotaged important life events, and individuals who had discovered that their biological families were healthier than their adoptive ones. "Your story gave me permission to cut contact with my toxic mother," wrote one commenter. "I realized that just because someone raised you doesn't mean they get to keep hurting you forever." The response taught me that Patricia's behavior wasn't just personal cruelty. It was part of a broader pattern of parental manipulation that many people endured in silence. Marcus had been quietly consulting with his lawyer friend, Tom Bradley, about the legal implications of Patricia's document, forgery and mail interference. What we discovered was more serious than we'd imagined. "Jessica, this isn't just family drama," Tom explained during our consultation. "Mail fraud, forging legal documents, and identity theft are federal crimes. She could face significant jail time if you chose to pursue charges." The statute of limitations hadn't expired on most of Patricia's crimes, particularly the forged birth certificate petition and the intercepted mail. Tom estimated that with the evidence we had, dozens of intercepted letters, forged documents, and witness testimony from the adoption agency, a prosecutor would have a strong case for multiple felony charges, but pursuing criminal charges felt complicated. Part of me wanted Patricia to face consequences for what she'd done, but another part just wanted to move forward with my new life. David and Catherine were firmly against pressing charges. "We got our daughter back," David said. "That's justice enough for us." Marcus was torn between wanting to protect me and respecting my decision. The decision was made for us when Robert, my adoptive father, reached out through Dylan. Apparently, the divorce proceedings had revealed more of Patricia's deceptions. She had been hiding debts, lying about investments, and had even attempted to take out a loan against their house using forged documents. "Dad says Mom has been lying about everything for years," Dylan reported. "The adoption stuff was just the beginning." Robert wanted to meet with us, not to defend Patricia or ask for forgiveness, but to provide additional evidence of her pattern of fraud. "I loved her for 30 years, he said when we met at a quiet coffee shop. "But I'm starting to realize I didn't really know her at all. The woman who could steal letters from a child and forge legal documents? That's not the person I thought I married." He brought bank statements showing that Patricia had been intercepting and cashing checks from Helen's estate that had been meant for me. Apparently, my birth grandmother had been sending money for birthdays and Christmas that Patricia had stolen for over a decade. The amount totaled nearly $15,000, money that should have helped with my college expenses while I was working 3 jobs. "I don't want your forgiveness," Robert said, his voice heavy with shame. "I want to make this right. I should have questioned the inconsistencies, should have wondered why you never got birthday cards from your birth family, should have protected you better." He handed me a cashier's check for the stolen money plus interest and signed an affidavit detailing everything he knew about Patricia's deceptions. With Robert's cooperation and the mounting evidence of financial fraud, Tom advised that the case would be strong enough for prosecutors to pursue charges even without our direct involvement. "Sometimes these things take on a life of their own," he explained. "When there's a clear pattern of criminal behavior, the state has an interest in prosecution regardless of the victim's preferences." 3 months later, Patricia was arrested at her new apartment and charged with mail fraud, identity theft, and forgery. The local news picked up the story with the headline, "Mother accused of stealing daughter's correspondence for decades." Seeing her mugshot in the paper felt surreal. Not satisfying, exactly, but like a final confirmation that her behavior had consequences beyond my hurt feelings. Therapy became essential during this period, but finding the right therapist proved challenging. Dr. Maria Santos, a specialist in adoption trauma, helped me understand that my experience wasn't just about discovering I was adopted. It was about processing decades of psychological manipulation designed to keep me isolated and dependent. Patricia exhibited classic signs of what we call possessive parenting, Dr. Santos explained. She saw you as her property rather than as an individual with your own needs and rights. The cruelty wasn't random. It was designed to keep you emotionally dependent while ensuring you never felt secure enough to question the family dynamics. The therapy sessions with David, Catherine, and my siblings were particularly healing. We had to navigate the strange territory of building relationships that should have developed over decades in just a few months. Michelle and I discovered we both loved mystery novels and had similar senses of humor. Michael turned out to be as analytical as I was, and we spent hours discussing engineering problems and sharing professional challenges. Kevin, at 21, was closest to my own young adult experience, and he helped me understand what growing up in a truly supportive family looked like. Mom and Dad always told us we had a sister who was probably struggling, but that we should send her love anyway, he said. They never spoke badly about your adoptive parents, even when they were angry about not being able to contact you. The contrast in family communication styles was stark. Where Patricia had used guilt, manipulation, and withholding affection as control mechanisms, the Hartwells approached conflicts with direct conversation and genuine concern for each other's well-being. They disagreed sometimes, but they never weaponized love or used emotional withdrawal as punishment. Learning to accept unconditional love proved more difficult than I'd expected. After 28 years of earning affection through perfect behavior, I kept waiting for David and Catherine to reveal conditions, expectations, or ways I was disappointing them. It took months for me to believe that they simply loved me for existing, not for what I could provide them. The healing wasn't linear. Some days I felt angry about all the lost time. Other days I felt guilty about abandoning Robert, who had been as much a victim of Patricia's manipulation as I was. Dr. Santos helped me understand that healing from psychological abuse involves grieving not just what was done to you, but what was prevented from happening. The relationships that should have existed, the support that should have been available, the security that should have been foundational. Marcus proved to be incredibly patient during this process. Some evenings I would come home from therapy emotionally drained, struggling to process revelations about my childhood that recontextualized everything I thought I knew about myself. He never tried to rush my healing or minimize the impact of what I discovered. "You're not the same person you were on our wedding day," he said one evening as we walked through Savannah's historic district after dinner with my birth family. "You're stronger, but also sadder, more confident, but also more careful about trust. I'm learning to love all the versions of you, the one who grew up trying to earn love, and the one who's learning to accept it freely." Patricia's arrest sent shockwaves through our extended family network, forcing people to reevaluate decades of family dynamics they had previously accepted without question. My aunts and uncles on Robert's side began reaching out, many apologizing for not intervening when they had witnessed Patricia's harsh treatment of me over the years. "We thought it was just strict parenting," my Uncle James admitted during a phone call. "But looking back, the way she talked about you compared to Dylan, we should have said something." Aunt Carol confessed that she had always wondered why I seemed so anxious and desperate to please during family gatherings, but had dismissed it as personality differences rather than recognizing signs of emotional abuse. The revelation about the intercepted letters prompted several family members to admit they had tried to maintain contact with me over the years, only to have their cards and gifts disappear. "I sent you birthday presents every year until you were 16, said my great-aunt Susan. "When I never heard thank you notes, I assumed you didn't want a relationship with me. Now I realize you never received them." Dylan struggled the most with recontextualizing our childhood. During a long conversation at his apartment, he broke down as he recounted memory after memory of witnessing Patricia's differential treatment. "I knew it was unfair, but I told myself it was because you were the younger sibling, or because you were more sensitive," he said. "I never imagined it was this calculated." He had started his own therapy to process the guilt of benefiting from a system designed to diminish me. "I got opportunities, resources, and emotional support that should have been shared equally," he said. "I don't know how to live with that, or how to build a relationship with you that acknowledges that history." But perhaps the most unexpected ripple effect was the impact on Marcus's family. Linda Thompson had been so horrified by Patricia's wedding behavior that she began questioning her own parenting patterns. "I realized I've been playing favorites with my grandchildren without meaning to," she confessed. Watching what Patricia did made me examine my own unconscious biases. The Thompson family embraced the Hartwells completely, treating them as in-laws rather than strangers. Linda and Catherine became close friends, bonding over their shared love for me and their mutual horror at what Patricia had done. I can't imagine deliberately keeping a child from loving parents, Linda said. It goes against every maternal instinct I have. The story also impacted our broader community in unexpected ways. The vendors who had donated services for our do-over reception began offering similar support to other couples whose weddings had been sabotaged by family drama. Turns out it's more common than we thought, said Sarah Martinez. Family members who can't handle not being the center of attention and deliberately ruin important events. Dr. Rachel Kim used our situation as a teaching moment at work, leading discussions about how childhood trauma affects adult professional relationships and why it's important for supervisors to recognize signs of healing and growth in employees. Jessica's experience reminded all of us that high-achieving people often carry invisible wounds, she explained. Even our church community rallied around us. Pastor Williams incorporated themes about chosen family and healing from toxic relationships into several sermons, always with our permission but never with identifying details. Sometimes the most Christian thing you can do is set boundaries with people who claim to love you but treat you with cruelty, he said during one particularly powerful message. Building traditions with the Hartwell family felt like learning a new language of love, one based on inclusion rather than competition, celebration rather than obligation, and genuine interest rather than performative care. Our first Christmas together was a revelation in how holidays could feel when they weren't weaponized for emotional manipulation. Catherine had saved my stocking from my first Christmas as a baby, before the adoption was finalized. Seeing it hanging next to my siblings' stockings, filled with thoughtful gifts chosen specifically for my interests, made me cry happy tears for the first time in years. We hung it up every Christmas, David explained, just in case this was the year you came home. The Hartwell family had a tradition of everyone sharing their high and low from the year during Christmas dinner. When it was my turn, I said, "My low was having my wedding day ruined by cruelty. My high was discovering I had been loved by you all along, even when I didn't know you existed." The table fell silent for a moment before Catherine reached over and squeezed my hand. Marcus and I started our own traditions too, blending both families we had chosen to keep. We instituted Gratitude Sundays, where we cooked dinner for whichever family members could make it, sometimes the Hartwells, sometimes the Thompsons, often both. These gatherings became sacred time where relationships could develop organically without the pressure of making up for lost time. We also created new holiday traditions that honored our unique journey. On our wedding anniversary, instead of just celebrating our marriage, we celebrate Family Day, the day that brought the truth to light and started our healing process. It sounds strange to commemorate such a painful moment, but Dr. Santos helped us reframe it as the beginning of our authentic life together. The Hartwells taught me that families can have ongoing traditions of growth and connection rather than rigid expectations and obligations. They had adventure days where someone would pick a random activity or destination, and everyone would participate without complaint. They had honesty hours during family meetings where anyone could bring up concerns or conflicts for open discussion. Most importantly, they demonstrated that love multiplies rather than divides. When they gained me as a daughter and sister, it didn't diminish anyone else's place in the family. It enhanced everyone's experience. Catherine often said, "Our table was always set for you, Jessica. We just didn't know when you'd arrive to sit down." The contrast with Patricia's scarcity mindset was profound. Where she had operated from the belief that love, attention, and resources were limited commodities that had to be carefully rationed, the Hartwells showed me that emotional abundance was possible when families chose generosity over control. My relationship with Robert began to heal once he was free from Patricia's influence. He started joining our Sunday dinners occasionally, and I watched him learn to interact with me as an individual rather than as an extension of Patricia's will. "I forgot what you were like when you weren't walking on eggshells," he said after one particularly enjoyable evening. Dylan's healing journey paralleled my own in many ways. As he began to understand the extent of the damage caused by our childhood dynamics, he became one of my strongest advocates. He started bringing his girlfriend to family events, and I watched her experience what healthy family interaction looked like in real time. "I want our kids to grow up knowing they're unconditionally loved," he told me privately. Looking back now, I realized that Patricia's wedding day announcement was meant to be my destruction, but it became my liberation. She had spent 28 years building walls around me, keeping me isolated from the love that had been waiting all along. When she tore down those walls in a moment of spite, she inadvertently freed me to find where I truly belonged. The woman who tried to convince me I was lucky to have her inadvertently led me to discover I was cherished by people who had never stopped believing I would come home. In trying to humiliate me, she revealed the depth of love I had been denied. In seeking to diminish me, she illuminated the family who had been holding space for me all along. Today, when I look at my wedding photos, both sets, the painful originals and the joyful redo, I see the full story of my journey from performing for conditional love to resting in unconditional acceptance. Patricia thought family meant ownership. The Hartwells taught me that family means belonging. And finally, after 28 years of uncertainty, I know exactly where I belong, even though she's adopted. We took her in when her real parents abandoned her as a baby. The room went dead silent. 28 years and she had never once mentioned this. She chose my wedding day to destroy me. We've been so generous, giving her everything despite knowing she wasn't really ours. And this is how she repays us, by barely inviting any of our friends to her big day. That's when I realized this wasn't just cruelty. This was calculated revenge. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.